Good morning. Welcome to Bible Study with Andre and Betty. Thank you all for viewing with us today. I pray that you all had a good Thanksgiving week. And of course, every day is a day of Thanksgiving for those of us who are believers. So we are continuing our studies from the book of Acts. Today we're in chapter 23, and we'll see beginning in verse 12 that there's a conspiracy to kill the Apostle Paul because of his ministry of the gospel. And so we begin our studies today in chapter 23 of Acts. And Paul is still before the Jerusalem council making defense for himself. So verse 1 says, "And Paul, earnestly beholding the council, said, 'Men and brethren, I have lived in all good conscience before God until this day.'" So Paul is staring at the council, the men of the council, and he's saying, my conscience is clear. Verse 2, "And the high priest Ananias commanded them that stood by him to smite him on the mouth." So Ananias is the high priest of the Sanhedrin council of the Sadducees, and Caiaphas is the high priest of the Pharisees. But Caiaphas is not going to be talked about during this time. It's Ananias, the Sadducee. And so verse 3 said, after Ananias told the man that was standing by Paul to slap him in the mouth, then said Paul unto him in verse 3, "God shall smite thee, thou whited wall." In other words, you're covered over with whitewash. You're not God's high priest. "For sittest thou to judge me after the law, and commandest me to be smitten contrary to the law?" And he's talking about the Roman law that did not allow a Roman to be treated this way until they had come before the court. He says, so you're going against the law in slapping me. Verse 4, "And they that stood by said, Revilest thou God's high priest?" They're talking to Paul. Then said Paul in verse 5, "I knew not, brethren, that he was the high priest. For it is written, Thou shalt not speak evil of the ruler of thy people." So Paul is apologizing for having called the high priest a whited wall and rebuked him for treating him that way. So here Paul apologizes because it's written in Exodus 22, verse 29, that no one is to speak evil against the ruler of the people. Verse 6, "But when Paul perceived or understood that the one part was Sadducees and the other Pharisees, he cried out in the council, 'Men and brethren, I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee. Of the hope and resurrection of the dead, I am called in question.'" So he's saying, I believe in the hope of the resurrection, and because of this, then I've been brought under your court. And so what Paul is doing here is using diplomacy, as we'll see later, because the Sadducees and the Pharisees don't believe the same thing. Verse 8, for the Sadducees say that there is no resurrection. So the Sadducees don't believe in the resurrection, neither angel nor spirit, but the Pharisees confess both. So they are one council, but they are made up of much like what we have in our courts, only this is a religious institution. The Pharisees and the Sadducees were much like the Republicans and Democrats in our government system. So they did not believe the same thing. And because Paul did this, verse 9, and there arose a great cry, and the scribes that were the Pharisees' part arose and strove, saying, we find no evil in this man. So they're taking Paul's side. But if a spirit or an angel had spoken to him, let us not fight against God. And so the Pharisees believe in the resurrection and spirits and angels, and this contention arose with the Sadducees. And then the Pharisees come to Paul's side to say that they want to hear what he has to say. Verse 10, and when there arose a great dissension or disruption, the chief captain, fearing lest Paul should have been pulled in pieces of them, commanded the soldiers to go down and to take him by force from among them and bring him into the castle or into the barracks, the place where prisoners were kept. And verse 11, this is the third night since he came to Jerusalem. It says, and the night following, the Lord stood by him. The Lord stood by Paul and said, be of good cheer, Paul, for as thou hast testified of me in Jerusalem, so must thou bear witness also at Rome. And so because of this uproar that was happening against the gospel of Christ, the enemy is fighting through the Sadducees and the religious leaders the gospel of the grace of God. God comes and the Lord gives the Apostle Paul words of encouragement and let him know that just as he had testified in Jerusalem, he would also have to testify in Rome. And that will be most specifically in chapter 26. It's going to be throughout the rest of the book of Acts, but it's certainly going to focus in on chapter 26. Now, verse 12 is the fourth day since he was arrested. Verse 12, and when it was day, certain of the Jews banded together or conspired together and bound themselves under a curse, saying that they would neither eat nor drink till they had killed Paul. So they didn't know how long it would take, but they made a vow that they would not eat or drink until they had killed Paul. And this is the conspiracy to kill the Apostle Paul. Verse 13, and they were more than 40 which had made this conspiracy. 40 men had made this conspiracy. And they're putting the plot in place by verse 14. They came to the chief priests and elders and said, "We have bound ourselves under a great curse, that we will eat nothing until we have slain Paul." Now, verse 15, therefore ye with the council signify to the chief captain that he bring him down unto you tomorrow, as though you would inquire something more perfectly concerning him. And when you do this, and we are ever he come near, whenever he comes near, are ready to kill him. So they came to the council, and they called the chief priests and the elders and told them to play a part in this conspiracy, being that they would ask the chief captain to bring Paul down for more questioning. And when they would do this, then these 40 men would be ready to kill him. Verse 16. And when Paul's sister's son heard of their lying in wait, he went and entered into the castle and told Paul. So here we find that the Apostle Paul has a sister, and his nephew heard of what these 40 men were planning to do, and he went into the barracks and told Paul. Verse 17, then Paul called one of the centurions unto him and said, bring this young man unto the chief captain, for he hath a certain thing to tell him. So Paul called one of the soldiers who was a centurion, in control of at least 100 others. Paul called him and told him to bring his nephew to the chief captain. Verse 18. So he took him and brought him to the chief captain and said, Paul the prisoner, this is the centurion talking to the chief captain, Paul the prisoner called me unto him and prayed me to bring this young man unto thee, who had something to say unto thee. Verse 19, then the chief captain took him by the hand, the young man by the hand, and went with him aside privately and asked him, what is that thou hast to tell me? And the young man said in verse 20, the Jews have agreed to desire thee that thou wouldest bring down Paul tomorrow into the council, as though they would inquire somewhat of him more perfectly. He says, the young man says to the chief captain in verse 21, but do not thou yield unto them, for there lie in wait for him of them more than 40 men, which have bound themselves with an oath that they will neither eat nor drink till they have killed him. And now are they ready, looking for a promise from thee. In other words, don't bring him to the council at their request, because they're conspiring to kill him. Verse 22, so the chief captain then let the young man depart, and charged him, see thou tell no man that thou hast showed these things to me. Don't tell anybody. And verse 23, and he called unto him 2 centurions. The chief captain called unto him 2 centurions, saying, make ready 200 soldiers to go to Caesarea, and horsemen 70, and spearmen 200. At the 3rd hour of the night, get ready with 470 men, to take Paul to Caesarea and start around 9 p.m. at night, verse 24, and provide them beasts that they may set Paul on and bring him safe unto Felix the governor. Verse 25, and he wrote a letter after this manner. So he provided the 470 men, and then he wrote a letter, and he's going to send the letter with the soldiers to Felix the governor. Now, verse 26 is the first time we learn what the chief captain's name is, and that's Claudius Lysias. So he says, Claudius Lysias, unto the most excellent governor Felix sendeth greetings. Verse 27. This man was taken of the Jews and should have been killed of them. Then came I with an army and rescued him, having understood that he was a Roman. Verse 28. And when I would have known the cause wherefore they accused him, I brought him forth into their council. Verse 29, whom I perceived to be accused of questions of their law, but to have nothing laid to his charge worthy of death or of imprisonment or bonds. Verse 30, and when it was told me by Paul's nephew how that the Jews laid wait for the man, I sent straightway to thee. I sent immediately to you, and gave commandment to his accusers also, to say before thee what they had against him. Farewell. So that's the end of the letter. But he's saying to Felix the governor that he want not only Paul to stand before his court, but also the accusers of Paul, to the council, to stand before him. Verse 31, then the soldiers, as it was commanded, took Paul and brought him by night to Antipatris. Now this is the 5th day. On the morrow, verse 32, on the morrow they left the horsemen, that is the 70 horsemen, to go with him, and the others returned to the castle. Verse 33, who, when they came to the 70 soldiers with Paul, verse 33, who, when they came to Caesarea and delivered the letter of the epistle to the governor, presented Paul also before him, before Felix. Verse 34, and when the governor had read the letter, he asked of what province he was. And when he understood that he was of Cilicia, that would be Tarsus, is the city from which Paul was born. He said, when I understood that he was of Cilicia, he said to the Paul in verse 35, I will hear thee, said he, when thine accusers also come. So I'm not going to talk to you now, Paul, but when your accusers come forth, then I will hear what you have to say. And he commanded him, the governor commanded him, Paul, to be kept in Herod's judgment hall. So here Paul again is put in prison. He's left Jerusalem under the council of the Jews, and now he's face to face with the governor of the Roman Empire of Caesarea Philippi. And so he is being kept in Herod's judgment hall, which is where the prisoners of Herod the king are kept when they have offended the king, that is King Herod. And this is in the Roman Empire. Oh, so it'll get more and more interesting as we go through the following chapters, but we'll conclude for today. And thank you all for listening. Thank you all for praying for us. And we're always in prayer for you all. So thank you all for viewing our videos. Thank you for your comments and your sharing your thoughts with us. So have a great day, and I will see you all next week. Have a great day and a great week. Bye-bye.